everyone. Welcome to the December 20th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona, and I'll be joined in just a second by my co-host, Craig Milkowski. On the podcast this week, we're going to take a look at some stakes races upcoming this weekend at Gulfstream Park, Aqueduct, and a few from the Fairgrounds card on Saturday. The major graded stakes race this week is the one at Gulfstream Park, the Mr. Prospector, the 10th race on that card. Features two of the top sprinters in the country, Imperial Hint and XY Jet, and that's where we'll start things off. And Craig, let's just dive right in because I know you've got a movie to make after we record this, so let's get things going.
Yeah, the Force is going to be with me today, I guess. Go see some Star Wars. I'm not one of those crazy Star Wars guys going dressed up like Darth Vader or anything, but I've seen them all, so I want to see this one.
Nice. I've seen the first few, not all the recent ones, so maybe I'll have to catch up at some point. Let's get to the handicapping and talk about this Mr. Prospector Gulfstream Park. Perhaps it's not the most interesting wagering race, I guess, unless you want to take a stand against one of the favorites. It is, on paper, a two-horse race between these two top sprinters, Imperial Hint and XY Jet. I think the major question regarding these two, though, is the 7 furlong distance, because I'm not sure that 7 furlongs is really the best trip for either of these horses.
Yeah, that was the first note I made, that distance could play a big part in this race. It does look like a two-horse race on paper. As you said, Imperial Hint is 3 for 5 at 7 furlongs. But if you really do a deep dive into the past performances, those 3 wins came in easier races where he made an easy lead early, which is something that's not likely to happen here with XY Jet in the race. XY Jet is 0 for 3 at the distance. He hasn't tried it in a while. They all came pretty early, I think, in his 3-year-old season. But I'm not going to fault anybody for wanting to take at least a shot against them. I would just say if you're going to do that, you need to get paid. You can't be taking borderline overlays when you want to play against horses like that. I do think there are a couple of interesting options. I think Lasting Legacy is in really top form for Jason Service. He's run some big figures, and he's done it with not the greatest pace setups. And I also think Diamond Oops has run some figures that could put him in the mix. Like I said, I'm not advocating going against those top two, but if you somehow were able to get close to double-digit odds on those, I could understand it.
I would say that I strongly prefer Imperial Hint to XY Jet of those two horses. I know the pace projector is predicting that XY Jet has a pretty significant advantage in this race. They have him on the lead in a situation favoring the front runner. To me, that's somewhat mitigated by what we talked about with the 7 furlong distance. I think if one of these horses gets the distance, the pace projector will help, but I don't think that's going to get them home alone. And with XY Jet, he's a horse that when he gets into top form, he's among the best sprinters in the country, but we don't always see those top performances out of him. He's a little bit more inconsistent. Also, I'm bothered by the fact that Jorge Navarro has not been winning at Navarro-type numbers recently. If you just look over the past 30 days for him in Formulator, he's only winning 6 out of 50 races, 12%, with an ROI that's hovering around 50 cents for $2. So to me, those are some negatives. I just think Imperial Hint's a better horse, and I trust him a little bit more to get the 7 furlong distance. I like his stalking running style, so he doesn't have to go after XY Jet too early. I think Imperial Hint is the horse to beat in here, but given that I'm concerned about the distance, I would go to Lasting Legacy as my top pick in this race. I know you mentioned him as being a horse that's in good form right now. Jason Service seems to be doing well down at Gulfstream. And I know this horse hasn't won by huge margins in his recent races, but I just like the way that he's done it. He didn't get a great trip last time out of the Mr. Prospector. Not that he had real trouble, but he sort of had to run through kickback and split horses at the top of the stretch. And I just thought he was really game to win that race. The same thing goes for his race 2 back when he probably wasn't on the best part of the racetrack coming up the inside to win that day. Just think overall his form is better than it seems, and he's really been unstoppable for Jason Service. I know he put forth 2 subpar efforts for Steve Asmussen along the way, but when he's in good form, he's running some pretty competitive speed figures. So I would take a shot with Lasting Legacy in this race.
Yeah, and I agree with you on Imperial Hint. I think of the 2 big players that he's the one I'd want. My one concern with him is that he's drawn inside XY Jet, and I would hope that they just kind of let XY Jet go and sit outside of him, try to make up that ground later. But sometimes your hand gets forced a little bit inside. But with that long run to the first turn, I think Jorge Castellano or Javier Castellano will do the right thing. But I'm with you. Of the two I mentioned, Lasting Legacy and Diamond Oops, I do prefer Lasting Legacy. But, the point is, I don't think these two tower over the field as much as the morning line will lead you to believe. I do think there's a legit chance that both of them could lose.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't dispute that it's going to be bet that way because these are two name horses that have a following. But I agree. It's a bit of a more wide open race than it might seem at first glance. Let's move on to Aqueduct, where on Saturday they're running the Queens County Stakes, going 1.1 miles on the main track. And this is kind of a tough race to get a handle on because I think there are a number of contenders. They all have little minor flaws. I guess the horse to beat is Stan the Man, the number 2. He's got some speed, and I think tactical speed at the very least is going to be an asset in this race because there's not a ton of it in this field. And Stan the Man, probably he's more of a miler type, but he's gotten the 1 1/8 distance in the past. The real question for him is the layoff. And I think you've got to ask yourself, do you want to take a horse coming off this kind of layoff that's going to be a pretty short price?
Yeah, I don't know if it's good or bad, but we thought similarly in here. I can't take a short price on a horse coming off that long a layoff. Going at a long distance, that's probably not his best. So, I think he's legitimate and has a shot. I landed on Major Cabby. He's a horse that's in real good form for Peter Miller. He tried to Clark last time where he ran into Tom Stata, who is probably one of the better older horses in training right now. So I think he was a bit above his head. And I was just looking for kind of a new shooter in here. He's only 5-2 on your morning line, so I don't think he's any huge value or anything, but it's just kind of a lesser of the many other evils. There's a lot of things I don't like about the other horses in the field, and I don't really have any negatives on Major Cabby, so he's where I landed.
Yeah, it's funny. Stan the Man, he's been ready to run for a while because they originally entered him in the fall high weight actually twice because that race was canceled twice and then finally run on the third attempt. And he didn't run back in that race when they ran at the third. Well, when they tried to run it the third time, they ended up going in this Queens County instead. I actually picked him both times in the fall high weight going the 6 furlongs. But in this race, where he's going to be the favorite as opposed to the other one where he was going to be a long shot, just not thrilled with the short price. I hear you on Major Cabby. My problem with him is I thought he got really good setups in those 2 wins at Keeneland, 2 and 3 back. You see those pace figures. They're all color-coded blue for those races. Just got to control those on the front end and draw off in the lane. He's got to deal with Stan the Man on the front end. Not that Stan the Man's a need the lead type of horse because he's not. I think Major Cabby could get loose in this race. Just the 1 1/8 distance, quality of the field. I'm not totally sold on Major Cabby, though I do think he's definitely dangerous given the pace setup. I wanted to look for somebody else at a slightly better price, so I'm going with Backside of the Moon. If you follow my picks at Naira a lot, you know that this is one of my favorite horses, so no surprise that I'm picking him in this race. But I will say that Rudy Rodriguez got Backside of the Moon into the top form that he's been in quite a while. His last couple of starts, I thought he ran really well to win that allowance race 2 back, going the 1-turn mile distance. And then last time out, what I want to say about that race is, while he only won by a neck over No Dozing, No Dozing's a good horse who is probably best going that 1 mile distance. And also, Backside of the Moon has never loved a sloppy sealed track. So I think it's a credit to him that he was able to win over a surface that's probably not what he prefers. He's claimed by Bob Closaris now, and some might view that as a negative because he's away from Rudy. But Bob Closaris does okay off the claim. He actually won first off the claim with an 18-1 shot at Belmont Park a couple months ago. So if he can just hold this horse's form, I think he's going to be tough because he can get the 1 1/8 distance, and his speed figures put him in the mix.
Yeah, I have no argument with him. Just a little side note on the Queens County. I have to mention one of my favorite horses of all time, Evening Attire. I was looking at the winners of this race, which I knew he was one, and it just really jumped out at me. This horse won this race when he was 3 and then again when he was 9. I don't know that you'll ever see that again in any stakes race anywhere. So I thought that was kind of interesting. As far as Major Cabby goes, he's one of these horses I think he's worth tracking. He's obviously already run in Kentucky a few times, but I think we're going to see a lot more of these California horses shipping out than we have in years past due to the state of racing out there currently. So it may be an edge for handicappers out there to just kind of follow these California horses and see when they ship out, when they show up at Oaklawn and fairgrounds and places like that, how they're doing and how their speeds, how they look on speed figures and how they stack up and if they're transferring well.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point about the California horses and the likelihood of how we might see a lot more of them in the future. And Evening Attire, one of my favorite horses. I remember watching him growing up when I was a kid, teenager, going to the racetrack. I was there, I think, when he won the Jockey Club Gold Cup. One of my favorite races was when he battled Funny Side, and I believe it was the Excelsior in the spring, kind of like the spring counterpart to this race. So yeah, definitely a horse that I like to go back and watch replays of from time to time. Let's move on to the fairgrounds. There are 4 stakes there that we're going to discuss. They're running more than 4 stakes on Saturday, but we're going to discuss the 9th through 12th races, actually comprising the pick 4 sequence. We're going to begin with a turf race, the Blushing KD, which is the 9th on the card. And we should mention ahead of time, there is some inclement weather predicted in the New Orleans area. I believe there's like an inch of rain predicted to fall on Saturday. So remains to be seen what the turf condition is, or if these races even do stay on the turf. So we'll approach these turf races a little tentatively, but the Blushing KD, I think the real story in this race is just the amount of speed signed on, because I know the pace projector is predicting a fast pace, but when you start to go through this field, a lot of these fillies want to be on the front end, and I think something's got to give.
Yeah, I totally agree with the pace projector in here. As there's a big field of 11 entered. That in itself is a factor in predicting the fast pace, but it's certainly not the only reason. As you say, there's lots of speed drawn in here. That includes the morning line favorite, Dream Passage. She is a deserving morning line favorite for Brad Cox, but I do think that pace could work against her. So there's 2 horses that interest me in here, keeping that pace in mind. The first one is La Segnare. I really liked her return race. She did flatten out a little bit late, but I liked the move she made. She was out in the clear, not taking a whole lot of cover through the lane, and I thought she ran well. And the other one that really interests me, and probably would be my top pick, of course it's going to come down to price many times, but is Smart Emma. 3 and 4 back, she ran some really nice 120 plus TimeformUS speed figures. And I think you can give her excuses for the last 2. The race 2 back, she was in at Kentucky Downs, and that's just a really quirky track. And I generally put lines through bad races as well as good races there. And then the last time out at Keeneland, she ran into Daddy is a Legend, who is a graded stakes performer, even though it was only an allowance race. I think she went on to run second in one of the graded stakes races out in California. And there was just absolutely no pace in that race. All the figures, our pace figures, are color coded in blue. And that's another one I just think you can put a line through. So if you go back to a couple races, it makes her a really strong contender in here. She likes to come from off the pace, and I think she's going to get plenty of it.
Yeah, I've got no problem with that. I kind of landed on the same outlook when I was going through this race, because it's hard to make a case for a lot of these speed horses getting the right trip. And I think the best of the closers is just so obviously Smart Emma. When I looked at the morning line, I was kind of expecting to get a better price than 5-1 on her, but the morning line's probably right, because I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to see that her running style just fits this race really well. And I agree with everything you were saying about her recent races. I don't think her form is quite as bad as it seems, because she just didn't get the right trip last time, as you were alluding to. So I've got no problem with Smart Emma. We'll see what price she is, but she just seems to fit this race really well. I do want to say I think Dream Passage is going to be tough. I know that she's going to get caught up in what's supposed to be an honest pace, but she doesn't need the lead. She's been successful from a stalking position in the past, and she's just in great form right now for Brad Cox. And if this race does stay on the turf, and the turf course has some give to it, Dream Passage has no problem handling a yielding or softer turf course. I think that's something that's important to look at. We don't know that about a horse like Smart Emma per se. Other horses that definitely like some give in the ground are English Soul, who handled it in the Cardinal last time, as well as the number 10 Stave. So just look at that if the turf course does come up wet and this race stays on. But those are the ones that I would mostly focus on. But I lean towards Smart Emma and Dream Passage. Let's move on to the Sugar Bowl, which is the second leg of this pick 4 sequence. 6 furlongs on the dirt for the 3-year-olds. Not the biggest field in the world, but I think it's a pretty competitive race, because you can really make a case for just about every runner in this field. The 2 towards the inside are likely the ones that are going to take the most amount of money. Shaw, Shake Me Up, whose debut we talked about on the TimeformUS Pacecast about a month ago, and Gold Street, who also won impressively, breaking his maiden in his 4th start at Churchill Downs last time. These 2 look pretty formidable if they just repeat their maiden wins, don't you think?
They do, but I actually did wind up going against them. It's a bit of the pace projector doesn't have this projected as fast, but I think all of the inside three horses do have a good amount of speed. So I don't think anybody's going to get an easy trip here. As you said, none of them would surprise me if they improve a bit. I've heard a lot made of the trainer, Keith DeSormo, not doing much with horses first time out. We talked about it on our pace cast, but I'm always a little leery of those horses. People seem to expect the horses are going to improve a lot just because that's what their normal horse typically does. But often when we see horses like that, that really isn't the case. He probably surprised the trainer as well, but I don't expect the same amount of development as you would normally get with your typical Keith DeSormo trainee. So you have Steve Asmussen horse right outside, Gold Street, who ran well, finally broke his maiden last time out in his fourth start after a couple second place finishes, got a 99 TimeformUS speed figure. And then you have Ryan's Cat right to their outside, who's actually about to run in his 8th race already. He's shipping in off a big win at Mahoning Valley, where he won by 14 lengths, got the biggest TimeformUS speed figure in the field at 104. So I actually went in a little bit different direction, and I'm leaning towards self-taught in here. He's a horse who's a little bit lacking on the speed figures. He's run 93 the last couple times, both in victories at Delaware. Then he went to Churchill for Albert Stall at first time in his barn. But I really like the tactical ability of this horse. He's been able to sit off the pace both of the last 2 times. 2 times back, he did it in a race with blue fractions. Last time he was in virtually the same position in a race where we have red fractions. So I really like that ability to adapt to the pace scenario. And I was just looking for a bit of a price. And I think he might actually be the longest price in here. I don't remember the exact morning line, but he's a horse I actually give a pretty good shot to.
Yeah, this is a difficult race because there are 6 runners, but I really do think you can make a case for all 6 of them. And you did pick the biggest price in the morning line. And I'm not going to really argue with that horse because, well, he does have to improve a little bit on the speed figures. I agree with everything you said about the trip he's likely to get and the trajectory of his career and how he's improving. So I'm not against him by any means. This is the kind of race where if I was playing a pick 4 sequence, I like to use the Steve Christ ABC method. And this is one where I would probably split them up among A's, B's, and C's, but I'd use all of them in some respect. I'd have each one in some kind of slot. I wouldn't throw anybody out in this race. I chalked it out. I like the 2 Gold Street the best. He'd be my top pick in this race. I just thought he ran well, even in defeat, 2 and 3 back behind some nice horses and Complex Fire and Wayno, his stablemate. He just finally broke through against a weaker maiden field last time at Churchill Downs, but I like the way he did that race, drawing off impressively late. He's this big, good-looking horse with a nice stride on him. I thought he got over the sloppy sealed track really well that day, and that bodes well again if the track comes up wet at the fairgrounds on Saturday. So I just think Gold Street makes a lot of sense. Shasha Shake Me Up definitely has ability. I don't have really numbers to back this up, but I never like when horses debut going a longer distance and then in their second starts coming back against winners, they cut back in distance. To me, that's just not a great sign. Typically, when horses debut over longer distances, it's because they're usually meant to go longer. So I don't love that he's cutting back from the 7 to the 6. So I'm giving the nod to Gold Street. If I had to include a long shot, it would probably be Axiomo the 6, because I know they tried turf a bunch of times, but if you just isolate Axiomo's dirt races, you could make the case that he's actually a better dirt horse, and he handled the slop last time against a weaker field at Churchill, but he's one that could be picking up pieces late. So I'd go in that direction in the Sugar Bowl.
Yeah, the one I'm against out of the group we talked about would probably be Ryan's Cat. And he's the horse that comes in with the biggest speed figure, but he really had no competition last time. He got away with murder on the front end, all blue fractions, not much competition. So he's a horse who has proven he has to have the lead to win. That's the only way he's won in any of his races. So he'd be the one I'd be against if I had to pick one.
I don't disagree with that. He'd probably be my 6th pick as well. But if you're playing a pick 4 sequence and you're leaving out just one horse, that always comes back to bite you, or so it seems. Let's move on to the 11th race. It's the Buddy Diliberto Memorial. Same distance as the Blushing KD that we talked about before, but this is for the Colts and Geldings and horses going a mile and 16th on the Fairgrounds turf course. This race just gave me a big headache. A lot of contenders, huge field of 13 runners. Again, it's a race that features quite a bit of speed, perhaps not as much speed as the Blushing KD, but I don't think you want to be right on the front end here. And but again, if you've got a closer, got to work out a trip because it's going to be hard to pass them all in this congested field.
Yeah, I did want to mention it is 13, but Captivating Moon has entered both this race and the Tenacious and the very next race on the card that we're going to talk about. So not sure which one he's going to go in, but either way, it's going to be a big field. I do agree with the fast pace scenario predicted by the pace projector. The two morning line favorites both have some early speed, but they're also drawn far outside. They're both trained by Brad Cox again. Dot Matrix and Factor this. And because of that, I went looking for a closer again, and Parlor really kind of jumped out at me. He was claimed last time out by Mike Maker, and we know he does very well with these claims. He makes some moves in the turf stakes. He has the right running style for the race. He's got a good post in the middle of the field. As you say, you are kind of hoping that he's going to work out a trip. He's 10-1 on the morning line. I think that's probably a bit of a pipe dream. I would be happy with half of that on him in here, but it's a tough race, but Parlor's the way I lean.
Yeah, Parlor is one of the two or three that I would probably narrow this down to as well. He makes a lot of sense off the Mike Maker claim, which you mentioned. He's got back form too for Eddie Keneally that would just put him right in the mix in this race. He had no excuse to lose last time because I thought he got a great trip and really had dead aim on Sailing Solo, who's drawn right outside of him here and almost stuck his head in front at about the 16th hole, and Sailing Solo battled back and beat him. And I don't like when horses hang like that, but still, Mike Maker does so well off the claim. Maybe he can push him over the top. My one concern with Parlor, though, is that if you look through his PPs, he's never a horse that's shown that he really likes any given the ground. And if the turf course does come up wet on Saturday, I think that might be an issue for him more than some others. It's not going to be an issue for Dot Matrix, who's the favorite in this race. And I do think Dot Matrix is the horse to beat. He's just been in good form recently. He even handled the 11 furlong distance in the Red Smith last time, even though that's probably not his best trip. I like him cutting back here. He's going to get some pace to close into, but he's shown more tactical speed recently, so I don't even think the pace would compromise him if it's a little bit slower. And he handles given the ground. So to me, Dot Matrix is probably the most likely winner. Nothing clever because he's probably going to be the favorite, but I would prefer him to most of the others in this race, and we'll see what kind of price he is. Factor this Brad Cox other horse. He's okay too. I didn't think he had a major excuse to lose to Renaissance Frolic last time. They're both okay, but I just thought Dot Matrix was a better horse and Parlor was the interesting other one to throw in at a bit of a better price. Let's talk about the last race we're going to mention on this podcast. It's the end of that pick four sequence at the fairgrounds, the Tenacious, which Craig just mentioned before. Captivating Moon also cross-entered in here. This one's on the dirt, going a mile and 70 yards. And at first, I was a little surprised to see Pioneer Spirit as the morning line favorite. When I started to dig through this race, I see why, because there's just not that much speed signed on. And I know the pace projector is not predicting a situation favoring horses on or near the lead, probably because it's a 10-horse field. But Pioneer Spirit just looks pretty loose in this race. And if he gets to the front on a pretty moderate pace, he's just going to be tough to run down.
Yeah, I looked at it a little bit different than you did from a pace protector standpoint. For one, I looked at CZ Rocket, who actually outran Pioneer Spirit early last time. So I don't think it'll be as easy as the pace projector's predicting. And also we have Tringali, who's drawn in the 7th post, who has basically been a sprinter his whole career. I think he went 2 turns once on turf, and he did make the lead that day. So I do think he's a bit of a pace influence as well. The one thing I will note is pretty amazing. You don't see very often. Pioneer Spirit was claimed last time out for $150,000 from Brad Cox to the Robertino Diodoro barn. Not sure what to make of that generally. I'm not going to be a big fan of any horse leaving the Brad Cox barn. He's such a top trainer these days, so I wouldn't expect much of an upgrade. But that said, Pioneer Spirit still looks pretty tough. I'll save my selection. I'll let you go ahead and see what you think about it.
Yeah, I'm not saying that I would pick Pioneer Spirit on top. I think he's a horse that you have to take seriously in this race. And not that he's one that needs the lead. I think I probably misspoke there because he has been successful coming from just off the pace in the past. But he is a horse that appreciates not getting caught up in, any kind of fast tempo. And I think that's probably not going to develop here, but we'll see what happens. I do like him in this race. He's not my top pick, though. I would actually go to Lone Sailor as my top pick. And I know this is a horse that that doesn't love to win races, to say the least. He's got 11 second and third place finishes in 22 career starts with just a couple of wins. But a couple things about Lone Sailor. He likes some pace to close into, but I don't think he has to come from quite as far back as they place him in a lot of his races. He's got a bit more tactical speed than he's shown in many starts. And I'm hoping that James Graham doesn't just drag him off the pace here and allows him to at least be somewhere in a mid-pack position, because he's run really well at the fairgrounds in the past, despite not winning here. And also, he's a horse that's shown a real affinity for a sloppy sealed track. He won over that kind of going by 11 lengths at Saratoga when he broke his maiden. He nearly won the Oaklawn handicap over a sloppy track at Oaklawn back in April. And I know people are going to see some poor efforts recently, particularly in the Korea Cup last time. You might want to go watch that race on YouTube. It's pretty easy to find when you search for it. He just got a nightmare of a trip that day. You really can't take any kind of kickback over that track in Korea. And he was towards the back of the pack. His jockey was under a real rush to get him into the race and just rode him into trouble at multiple points. Just a nightmare scenario. And I would expect him to bounce back here. And I think he's as good as anybody else if he runs back to his top races.
Yeah, I have no problem with Lone Sailor, and I do worry a little bit about that trip to Korea. He has had some time to adjust coming back. That race was back in September, but sometimes horses don't come back quite the same. But the one I wound up going with was Blended Citizen. I mentioned horses leaving the Brad Cox barn. He's one who recently joined it. And looking through his past performances, I actually think he's a horse who is probably better on dirt than he is on turf, even though he's been running on turf mostly lately. He won the Peter Pan as a 3-year-old. He tried the Belmont Stakes against Justify, didn't do any running that day. But I like that Brad Cox put him right back on the turf. He ran a 1:17 TimeformUS speed figure, running down a loose leader when he won that allowance race last time. Now, he did have a decent amount of pace, but if you watch the start, he had real problems at the start, too. He didn't break particularly clean. Kind of took him a few strides to get his feet under him and really get going. So I was impressed by him, and I'm even going to upgrade that 1:17 he got, and I think he's a real strong contender in here.
Yeah, he's not a horse that I would dismiss by any means. If I was making ordinal picks, I'd probably go Lone Sailor, Pioneer Spirit, and put Blended Citizen third. He's definitely one that I want to include in this race. I like that last race as well. He's a horse that had shown promise as a 3-year-old and just kind of fell into a rut and a bad pattern for a while, probably racing on maybe the wrong surface, as you were pointing out. Getting back to dirt last time really seemed to wake him up, so wouldn't be surprised at all if he continues to improve for Brad Cox. So interesting, tough sequence at the fairgrounds. Hopefully we gave out some good ideas, but I think it's going to be a tough pick 4 sequence to hit. We'll see if the weather really impacts these races. Hopefully not, and it stays pretty dry down there. It's all the racing for this week. Just to do a little bit of housekeeping, we're going to skip the TimeformUS Pacecast next week. That would be falling on Christmas Eve, so we'll take that off. But we'll be back in exactly 1 week to do the TimeformUS Forecast next Friday, looking at the upcoming weekend races. We'll see how those are drawn, because I think a lot of tracks are running Saturday, Sunday, Monday, even I think Aqueduct is running New Year's Day on Tuesday as well. So we'll talk about some of those races next week. Enjoy the holidays, everybody. As always, you can listen to the TimeformUS Forecast and the TimeformUS Pacecast on drf.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, SoundCloud, wherever you get your podcasts. Just subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel and check us out. Thanks for listening this week, guys, and we'll see you again in 1 week.